Let's take our Bibles right now, listen to what God has to say, and let's open up to Matthew chapter 7. Way back in 1980, when I was a senior in high school, I was ready to launch out, graduate, and take on the world. And I remember during our last semester there, they gathered all the senior class together and had someone talk about choosing your career, what you're going to do off in the future after high school. And I remember the person saying, you really have two types of paths you can take. One is working with people, and one is not working with people. Working with people like accounting or, logging or, things are not primarily people. You can do that. But it's going to be much harder if you choose to go with people. People are much harder to work with as your source of your job rather than things, because people are so unpredictable. I remember them saying that. We all know people can be nice one minute and not nice the next. They can go in one direction and then totally turn around and go into another direction. They can be, faithful and loving and then turn around and be ruthless, and who knows where they're coming from. Lying, cheating, compassionate, loving. All sorts of things go on when you deal with people. And you can ask yourself, what are the rules here? Because I don't get it. When I'm working with numbers, there are rules. When I'm working with people, it doesn't seem like there's any rules. Last week, we looked at some rules for how to minister well. Remember, we said that I am a minister of Samuel's Church, but that if you are a regular attender here, if you're a Christian, you are one of the ministers of Samuel's Church, one of the saints who is called to do the ministry as we go out each week. And we looked last week on how to minister well. My job as your pastor is to teach you how to minister well as you go out. And if you remember last week, we looked at some good works that God has us all to do every day that we go out into the world to minister well. We said, be honest, be generous, and be helpful with everyone, and you're going to stand out and minister for God. Most people aren't honest, generous, and helpful as you go through life. But if you will simply do those three things on a daily basis, you will be ministering to all the different people that are either at school or at work, or your neighbors, family, whatever it might be. Remember, being honest. When you're tempted to lie, don't do it. Be honest. Be known as a person in your realm as she's really an honest person. He's really an honest person. That's one of the ways to minister. Another way is to be generous. When people abuse you and mistreat you, the world's way is to hammer back, get them back for what they did. God says, my way is to be generous back to them, to go the extra mile, to not treat others the way that they had treated you, but to be generous, just like Christ was generous to us when we mistreated him. That's a second way. And the third way was to be helpful. We all see people who mess up and do wrong things. It's really easy to just be critical and judging and condemning of other people and the wrong things they do. God says, instead of doing that, be a person who is helpful, to move alongside another person. Don't stand over them in judgment. Move alongside them and say, hey, can I help you get that speck out of your eye? To be helpful when other people do wrong things. How did you do last week with that? Did you remember to be that way? Those simple three things, if you will do those things, you'll be an amazing minister for God. So I encourage you to keep that up. Keep those three qualities right at the front of how you treat people, and you will go a long way to helping God. Now this week we could continue looking at different ways to minister to people, different rules to follow, and things go this way or that way. But I thought, since we've already been in the New Testament there in the Sermon on the Mount, why not just go to the one rule that covers everything? In the verses that we're about to look at, Jesus gives the one rule that covers every person, every occasion, every situation for how to minister to them. Do you know what that is? You probably do, but the question is not just do we know it, are we practicing it? So look at verse 12 for the number one rule for guiding every relationship we have. Chapter 7, verse 12. In everything. How many things? In everything, therefore. Treat people the same way you want them to treat you. For this is the law and the prophets. In everything, treat people the same way you want them to treat you. How many of you here want to be treated well? Anybody? You want to be treated well? Yeah, we all want to be treated well, don't we? When we express an opinion, we want to be listened to. When we have an idea, we want to be respected. When things go wrong, we want to be helped out. Sure, these are the way we want to be treated. We all know how we want to be treated. God's golden rule for how to treat others, this is in your insert, the golden rule for all relationships is treat others the way you want to be treated. Treat others the way you want to be treated. You've probably heard this since you were a tiny little child, but it really is something that is not practiced. How many people treat others the way they want to be treated? It's very simple to grasp, very rarely done. Very rarely. There are so many different people, so many different circumstances, so many different problems. How do we deal with them all? How do we know? I've had people this week say, I've got some problems in my life. How do I know what to do? This is the one rule that may not absolutely answer every question, but gives you a great way to start heading in the right direction. Put yourself in that other person's place, and then treat them the way you want to be treated. That is an amazing rule that God wants us to do. And if we will do that, God tells us in verse 12 that it sums up the law and the prophets. What's the law and the prophets? The law and the prophets was the Bible way of saying the Old Testament. All the ethical commands of the Old Testament are summed up in doing this. You may have heard there are 613 commands in the Old Testament. How in the world could you keep track of all that? Jesus says you don't need to keep track of all of it. You just need to keep track of this rule right here. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Because all the little particulars in the Old Testament that were the moral commands, all of them stem from that rule. It's just an application of that rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. For instance, do you want to be treated with honesty and with generosity and by people being helpful for you? Of course you do. That obligates you then to go out and be honest and be generous and be helpful to the people in your life. Very simple. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Just how well would you say you do at that? How well do you do at treating others the way you want to be treated? Well, we want to spend the rest of this sermon going over 4 ways to apply the golden rule and looking at Old Testament examples where God gave commands that sometimes seem kind of odd, but they stem from the golden rule. We're going to look at 4 of those so we can know how to apply this better in our lives. Because I could just say, okay, well, let's go out from here and just go treat other people the way you want to be treated. But we're going to look at it a little more practically than that. So 4 ways to apply the golden rule, and we're going to look first of all at Leviticus 24:19, a verse you probably read but may not remember. God commands Israel in this law, when you are harvesting your crops and forget to bring in a bundle of grain from your field, do not go back and get it. Now, do you gather what's going on there? Suppose you're working on a construction site, you hop in the truck, you're headed home, you say, oh, forgot my hammer. If you follow this rule, you're not supposed to go back and get your hammer. Is that what God is telling us to do here? Not really. That's a different application. When God originally gave this, he's talking to those who are harvesting in the fields, the farmers who planted these crops. Now it's come to harvest it, and they've harvested. And God gives several rules in this passage here. He says, number 1, Israel was not to harvest all of their crops. So you got this large field of wheat. One of the rules was you do not harvest 100% of it. You leave the corners. Don't harvest the corners. And number 2, if you are harvesting and you drop like a bundle of wheat, don't pick it up. If you drop it, don't pick it up. And then if you've put it all in the wagon and you're headed back to the barn on the way home and you realize, whoa, we forgot some that were off in the south end, you don't go back and get it. What was all that about? Why would they do that? Because of this verse. The continuation of the verse is, leave it for the foreigners and the orphans and the widows. Then the Lord will bless you in all you do. Yeah, but I'm losing. No, you're gaining, because the Lord will bless you in all you do. Why couldn't they go back and get the forgotten crops of the crops that were dropped because of the people who were needy. You put yourself in their place. Suppose you're a woman whose husband dies, and now you can't hold a job. And pretty much you have to just depend on the generosity of others, or go out and look for food to eat. Suppose you're an orphan, you don't have any parents. You may not have anyone to take care of you, and you've just got to scrounge. And so maybe you're going through the fields looking for things to eat, and you find this sheaf of wheat on the ground. And you just praise God. Look at this, how God provided for me. That's what this was all about. The rule that God has here is and this is in your insert, how do you practice the golden rule? This teaches us, number one, put yourself in the place of the one who is needy. Put yourself in the place of the one who's needy. That's what God is telling us here. Many people today have really bad attitudes about the abuse of our welfare system, and they really should be. I mean, there are many people who misuse the welfare system. They buy it for the wrong, buy things that they shouldn't need. They don't work when they say they're working, and the system gets abused, and it can cause people who are really hardworking to, have bad attitudes about it. We need to watch that, because God says there is things that we are to do for the hard-working poor. There are legitimate people who really need help, and you and I, who are doing better than most, should be able to help them. The rule that God says for the hard-working poor is put yourself in their place. Put yourself in their place. If you had your home burned to the ground, how would you want people to treat you? If you had been fired from your job, how would you want others to treat you? If you were a family living in a Salvation Army shelter, or if you were a person just on the side of the road struggling to put the tire on your car, how would you want others to treat you? God wants us to put ourselves in the place of people who are needy and then treat them the way that we would want to be treated. Do you know anyone that's needy this morning? I'm sure you do. God would say to you right now, put yourself in their place and then treat them the way you would want to be treated. Can you think of someone that you could help today, that you need to help, that is needy, and you've not really thought it through and put yourself in their place? After this service, God would have you go help them. Treat them the way you would want to be treated. That's the first application of the golden rule. Put yourself in the place of those who are needy. Let's look at another Old Testament law. Leviticus 19:17 says, "Be sure to correct your neighbor directly, so that you will not share in his guilt." Correct your neighbor directly, so that you will not share in his guilt. Here's God's command when you see someone doing wrong. Now, there's things that are, faults and failures that are wrong, and then there's serious sins that are going wrong. God tells us, don't just sit back and watch someone commit serious sins. Go and address it. Go and, it says here, correct your neighbors so that you won't share in the guilt of what they're doing. Where they're doing something harmful and you could have corrected them and you don't do it, God says, I'm not going to just hold them accountable. If you could have helped resolve that, I'm going to hold you accountable too. So you hear over the phone that one of your family members is lying to another family member. It's going to cause serious trouble. You can't just ignore that, or you will share in any guilt that happens to go along. You see a coworker steal something at work, or you have a friend with a serious alcohol problem, and you don't do anything about these things. God says the trouble that results from that, and you had the opportunity to do something, you're going to share partly in the guilt of what goes on there. Now, we can come up with 100 objections to getting involved. Well, yeah, but I'm not a perfect person, and what if they get mad at me? What if they tell me it's none of my business? And on and on and on. But what is God's rule? What is God's rule? God's rule is treat others the way you would want to be treated. And that gives us our second way to apply this in your insert. Put yourself in the place of the one who is straying from God. Put yourself in the place of the one who's straying from God, this one who's sinning. I want you to imagine that you have an important appointment tomorrow, important meeting to go to, but it's in a town that you've never really been to before. And so you get the best directions you can, and you head off in your car to go there. And your neighbor, who's outside and knows about this, sees you heading the wrong way. He's thinking, what is he doing? It's not that way, it's down that way. And your neighbor calls you up and says, hey, are you certain you know where this is? And you say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you. Wouldn't you be grateful if your neighbor corrected you about your heading the wrong direction? I think you would. How much more serious, though, if you were headed in the wrong direction with God? Would you want someone to correct you if you're headed in the wrong direction with God? Maybe you're blundering because you don't know a particular command from Scripture that God tells you to do or not do. Or maybe you do know and you don't care. Wouldn't you be grateful to someone who lovingly came alongside you and said, hey, you're not going in God's direction here. Can I help you? I think you would. I think we all would. We all need each other when we're either willful or unaware of the way God says. God says, I have a rule for you. I want you to treat others the way you would want to be treated if you were straying. Remember, this teaches us that practicing the golden rule does not always mean that it's going to be comfortable. Sometimes it's going to be difficult and hard to practice the golden rule like this. The Bible calls us salt and light. That sounds really good. But what happens when you put salt on a wound? What happens when you shine light on someone who's used to the darkness? It usually causes bad reactions. And sometimes practicing the golden rule, treating people the way you want to be treated, is going to cause a bad reaction. And that means we need to do it all the more tenderly and carefully. If you were straying away from God, how would you want someone to approach you? You certainly wouldn't want to have them condemn, stand over you in judgment, seem to enjoy what they're doing and be harsh about it. You would want them to be tender and caring and loving and soft about it. And that's the way God tells us to do that, with gentleness correcting those who oppose. So, doing the right thing here is right in God's eyesight, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be comfortable for us. But what is God's rule? God's rule is you got to treat people the way you want to be treated. And if you were straying and you would appreciate someone helping you to get back on track, we are obligated to do the same thing. Do you know anyone that's straying today? Now, you may not know how you're going to do it, but God would say, I want you to work to bring that person back. If you can approach them, approach them. If all you can do is pray for them, pray hard for them every day. But do whatever you can to help get that person on track, because if you were straying from God and you didn't care or you didn't know it, you'd want someone to help you. That's a second way that we need. Put yourself in the place of the person who's straying from God. Let me show you a third one. It's in Leviticus 19:16. It says, you shall not go up and down as a dispenser of gossip and scandal among your people. You shall not go up as a dispenser of gossip and scandal. Go up and down. Do you remember the definition we've given to gossip? Gossip is spreading a person's faults and failures with no view to their good. Spreading a person's faults and failures with no view to their good. Sometimes we need to talk about a person's faults and failures, like on a job interview, or a parent to a child, or a pastor to one of the congregation, or even congregation members to each other. But it always must be with a view to bettering their life. When there's just spreading it and talking about how bad someone treated another person, and period, that's it. God says that's gossip, and that's slander, and that's destructive. Why do we do that? Why is it well known that people like to gossip? I think it's primarily because it's so satisfying, isn't it? I mean, especially if it's someone we don't like, and we hear they've done something wrong and they failed here, and previously they treated us badly, or they think they're better than we are, or they've taken something from us that we want, and then we hear this bad news about them. Man, it was really satisfying to just share how bad they are. But what's God's rule? Treat others the way you want to be treated. Put yourself in the place of the person being gossiped about, God says. And that's the third practical way to do this. Put yourself in the place of the person being gossiped about. How would you want people to handle that juicy bit of failure that you committed? I don't think there's any question of what we would like people to do when they hear bad things about us. It says in Proverbs 11:12, "He who belittles his neighbor lacks sense, but a person of understanding keeps silent." Imagine that you do something stupid. Okay, it's not a sin, but it's just dumb and embarrassing. What do you want done when other people see that? It says here, the person lacking sense reacts how? Hey, he belittles you and criticizes you, shares it. What about the person who's wise? Just keeps his mouth shut. What an incredibly powerful thing, just keeping your mouth shut. Incredibly powerful. 99% of most people probably wouldn't keep their mouth shut, but just blab how stupid you were. But that one person who keeps their mouth shut, such a simple action, such a powerful thing to do, and spare your reputation. The next time you hear bad news about somebody, and particularly someone that you don't particularly like, put yourself in their place and treat them the way you'd want to be treated, which in this case just means you keep your mouth quiet. Have you been sharing bad news about other people with no view to their good? It's really easy to do. Our media loves it. But God says we can't practice that. So many lives have been destroyed by gossips. So many. Don't participate in that. When you hear bad news, put yourself in the place of that person and then treat them the way you'd want to be treated and keep your mouth shut about it. That's what God says to do. All right, let's look at one more way to apply the golden rule that's here in Leviticus 25:14. It says, "When you sell land to your countryman or buy any from him, do not take advantage of each other." Do not take advantage of each other. Let's suppose you have a yard sale and you drag up from your basement all the things you haven't used for years and you put them out there on your lawn on the table, and you high hopes of making a lot of money. And the people start trickling in, and someone sees something that you have there, and they make a beeline to the table, and they look at that, and they say, "Hey, how much do you want for that item?" And you hadn't thought it through, and you say, "Well, you know what, make me an offer." And the person says, $80. And you're thinking, $80? I wasn't going to ask for 10 and hope that they might give me 10. What do? Do you rub your hands together and say, "Oh, $80? I was kind of thinking more like 100. What do you say? Or do you just say, $80, great, and then just think, man, what a chump? What is God's rule? Treat others the way you would want to be treated. The fourth way to practice the golden rule is put yourself in the place of a person being cheated. Put yourself in the place of a person, of one who's being cheated. You might say, "Well, Pastor, you don't understand business. Business is all about making money, and in that situation you just described, that's making more money than you would normally make, so that's good." Well, what if, though, the person is completely unaware that they're outrageously paying more than what a thing is worth? That they could go down to the store and buy the same thing brand new for like $10. And they're willing to pay $80 because they're unaware. They just don't have any clue. Well, what's the rule? What if you were the person who was at the yard sale? What if you pull up and you see something you like, and man, you've been wanting this for years, there it is, it's in good condition, and in your mind, this is an expensive thing, maybe $150, I'll offer him 80. You have no clue it's only worth about 10. And you say, hey, I'll give you $80 for that, and the person says to you, hey, I really appreciate that, but this is really only worth about $10. I'll take 10 for it. What would your reaction be? Would you be grateful? I'm sure you would. You would be like, wow, what an incredibly generous person. Thank you so much. I had no idea that these weren't that expensive. If that's the way you'd like to be treated, God says you have an obligation to treat others the same way when the situation comes around. When you see someone being cheated, God says, treat them the way you want to be treated in the situation. Now, by the way, is the whole purpose of business to make money? God says no. God says the whole purpose of business is to please Him as you make money. To please God as you make money. You know, you can make a lot of money and not please God. God says that isn't moving forward. If you have fair prices and make a little bit of money because of it, God says you are farther ahead, much farther ahead than if you cheat people and make tons of money. It says in Proverbs 16:8, better is a little income with righteousness than great income with injustice. You might say, well, I'll just keep my mouth shut and I'll let this guy give me $80. I got a lot more. I got $70 more in my pocket. I'm way ahead. And God says, you're not way ahead. You're way behind. Because that does not please me. And that's the number one goal of business. Please God as you make money. Because now you have God needing to discipline you for not putting yourself in that other person's shoes as they're being way overcharged for something. And instead of doing that, you're cheating them. And God says, I'll need to discipline your life for that. You aren't ahead, you're behind. Now, what about the other way around? The other way around is, you know, we've all heard the story about the person who goes to the yard sale and they see something there that is worth $100,000, $100,000 necklace, and the person thinks it's a bunch of costume jewelry and they want $5 for it, and the person snatches it up and just laughs and goes on TV and shows what they got. Suppose you are at the yard sale and you see something that is being sold for $10 and you know it's $150. You know that should be the price. It's the opposite of the first example. What do? Say, hey, I'll buy that for 10 and just laugh all the way to the bank? Well, what's God's rule? When something is outrageously underpriced, what's God's rule? Treat the person the way you would want to be treated. If you're the seller, you have no clue that this little item that you're selling is, you know, worth $150. You think it's just a piece of junk and it's worth $5. And someone comes along and says to you, do you realize what you have there? That's worth $150, way more than what your price you're selling it for. Would you appreciate that? Would you be grateful to that person? Absolutely you would. If that's the way you'd like to be treated, that obligates you and me to do the same thing when we come across that. Instead of snatching up and laughing about, you know, how dumb that person was and they should have done their homework and, you know, they got what they deserved, you'd say to them, you know what, this is way, way, way underpriced. I don't want to cheat you. Let me give you a fair price for that. That's what God says to do. There are great bargains, and that's why we go to yard sales. But then there are also wrong bargains. When it falls into the category of a wrong bargain, God would say, put yourself in that person's shoes and then treat them the way you'd want to be treated. Are you selling anything? Or are you buying anything? Heed this rule of God's. Put yourself in the place of a person being cheated and ask how you would want to be treated. You need to practice that rule. All right, so this whole sermon is about how you can minister better, how you can minister well. My job is to equip you to do that through the Word of God. And here are just 4 practical ways to do it as you leave this building and go out into the world. God says, I want you to practice these things. Practice the golden rule. We could spend all day talking about little tiny rules. Let me give you the one big rule for everything that goes on when you're dealing with relationships. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And it's my observation that we often don't practice this because we just don't tend to be focused on other people as we're going through a busy day. You're a student and you get on the bus and you go to class and then you go to lunch and then you go to another class, come home, do your homework. And you've really not thought that much about other people because you're so busy with what you're doing. Or if you're an adult, you get up, get dressed, drive to work, go to work, eat lunch, go do some more work, come home, do some more work, and crawl into bed. And we really aren't thinking about the other people and their needs and what they're going through in life. But you know what? God says that's no way to live. That's what unbelievers do. They just put their heads down, worried about, am I going to have enough food and clothing? And, that's my concern. Just go to work, get the job done, and get back home. That's no way to live, God says. God says, I have assigned you as my people to minister to all the people that come across your path in a day. That's living. That's where life takes place. That as you go, you're ministering. You're not giving up going, but as you're going, you're looking around. The opposite is, just put your head down and push forward and get to the end of the day so you can, just have some time of peace at home. God says, don't just put your head down, put your head up and be looking around, and this person comes across your path. What are they going through? And that person comes across your path. What are they going through? And then as you see what they're going through, put yourself in their place and treat them the way you'd want to be treated. That's why I think this doesn't oftentimes get practiced. We all know this rule. But oftentimes we don't notice the other people in our lives because they're so busy rushing forward. We just need to slow down and look at the other people in our lives. So right here at the close of this sermon, think about the other people you come across on a daily basis. Can you just put them in your mind right now? Are there some in there that are needy? What would God have you to do for them? Are there some in there that are straying away from Him? God would have you to go move and try to help them back. Are there some that are having a bad story being spread about them? God says protect them. Keep your mouth shut. Try to stop others who are spreading bad news. And if you come across someone buying something, selling something, work to make sure that people aren't being cheated. How do we minister to other people? We practice the golden rule. Knowing this rule does not make doing it easy, but it makes it clear. Right? Knowing this rule means it's clear we know what to do. What do I want done to myself? All right, that's what I need to do. But it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. If it's a person who is needy, it means you're going to have to sacrifice helping for them. If it's a person who is straying, it means you're going to have to be bold and carefully, but clearly go to them and try to help them out of it. And if it's a person who's being cheated and being unfair, you've got to find some way to try to make that right. It might mean the sacrifice of some great income that you could make if you weren't being honest. But God says that sacrifice is worth it. So think of that specific person right now and put yourself in their shoes. And now, when you leave here, go do that for them. Can you do that? That's your homework. Put yourself in that person's shoes. Think about how you want to be treated, and then go treat them that way. It might be your spouse. Put yourself in your spouse's shoes. Then treat them the way you'd want to be treated. It might be your next door neighbor. It might be a coworker, classmate. That's how God says to minister. You know, we look around and we see that our world is so full of darkness. Randall mentioned at the beginning, so much darkness going on in our world. So many people are afraid and full of fear and anxiety and what's going to happen next and are we going to make it. Other people are angry and upset and trying to change things and either consumed with fear or consumed with anger. God says I doesn't want those two emotions to be our focus. God says I want you to focus on ministering to others as we go through life. That's your focus. Never be afraid, he says. And only be angry if it's going to be used for good in helping others. But focus. Put your focus this week on ministering to others as we go through these difficult times. That's what God says to do. I'm a minister. You're a minister of Samuel's Church. How do you know what to do? Treat others the way you want to be treated. Now, go forth and do that. Our society is in darkness, but you carry light that can make so many things better.